"Get me a real doctor," the wealthy white woman spat. The moment she regained consciousness, she erupted in rage, relentlessly berating and insulting the very surgeon who had just saved her life, simply because he was black. Her outrage quickly escalated into a lawsuit, falsely accusing him of negligence and discrimination, shifting the battle from the hospital to the courtroom. But what she didn't know was that this doctor was highly skilled, experienced, and had spent his entire career proving he belonged, and he wasn't about to back down now. The emergency room of St. Augustine Medical Center was alive with motion, the air thick with urgency. Machines beeped in rapid succession, their rhythmic alarms blending with the hum of hurried footsteps and the clipped voices of medical staff calling out vitals, orders and updates. The scent of antiseptic lingered beneath the sharper notes of sweat and adrenaline. Nurses wove between gurneys, their movements efficient, their expressions tight with focus. In the middle of it all, Dr. Andre Bennett stood calm, steady, untouched by the chaos that swirled around him. He had learned long ago that to survive in a place like this, you had to master stillness in the storm. Medicine wasn't just about skill or knowledge, it was about control. Control over the noise, over the pressure, over the weight of human life in his hands. And tonight, like every night, he carried that weight without hesitation. The call came in just after midnight. "Dr. Bennett," a nurse called out, briskly making her way toward him. "We've got a code stroke en route. Female, 62, collapsed at home. Paramedics report right side paralysis and aphasia. She's unresponsive." Andre turned, wiping his hands on a paper towel before reaching for the tablet she handed him. He skimmed the preliminary details, mind already assembling a plan. "Get the CT scan ready," he ordered. "Page neurology for backup and prep for a potential thrombectomy." "How far out?" "Less than 3 minutes." He gave a sharp nod. "All right, let's be ready." Even as he spoke, the automatic doors to the ER burst open, and the stretcher rolled in, flanked by paramedics moving fast. A frail, pale woman lay motionless atop the thin mattress, her right hand curled inward against her chest, her face slack on one side. Margaret Sinclair. Recognition flickered through him the moment he saw her name on the chart. Of course it had to be her. Margaret Sinclair was no stranger to the hospital. A well-known donor, her name had been murmured in break rooms and hallways, not just because of her wealth, but because of the sharpness of her tongue and the ugliness of her beliefs. Andre had never met her in person before tonight, but he had heard plenty. She was old Southern money, a woman who carried herself with the kind of unshakable entitlement that came from generations of privilege. She had been overheard making offhanded remarks about certain types of doctors and complaining about the direction the hospital was taking whenever she spotted black nurses or Hispanic technicians on staff. And now she was here, in his hands. The irony of it barely registered. There wasn't time for irony. Andre stepped forward, moving into position beside the stretcher as the paramedics rattled off their report. He leaned over her, assessing. "Mrs. Sinclair, can you hear me?" His voice was measured, professional. A flicker of movement, her eyelids trembled before cracking open. Her pupils were sluggish, unfocused. For a brief second, confusion clouded her face, and then her gaze locked onto his. Something inside of her sharpened. Even through the haze of neurological trauma, through the weakness of her failing body, she saw him and she knew. Andre recognized the look instantly. He had seen it more times than he cared to count. The stiffening, the hardening of the jaw, the flicker of something primal, something deep-rooted and instinctive. Even in her current state, even in a moment where life and death hung in the balance, her disgust was reflexive. Her lips moved, barely more than a breath of sound, but he knew what she was trying to say before the words even fully formed. W. The slurred, fragile syllable scraped against her throat. "You're in the ER, Mrs. Sinclair," Andre told her, keeping his tone neutral. "You're having a stroke. We need to act fast to help you." Her pupils dilated slightly. Fear. Not of her condition. Of him. She tried to shift, her fingers twitching weakly against the blanket, but her body betrayed her. She couldn't move. Her breathing hitched, her face contorting not from pain, but from something deeper. Even as her body failed her, she still tried to recoil from him. Andre didn't flinch. He didn't react at all. This was not new. This was not surprising. He straightened. "We need to get her to 2CT now," he said briskly. "Let's move." The team surged into motion, and the moment was buried beneath the weight of medical urgency. The next few hours blurred into the kind of sharp, precise action that defined Andre's career. Tests, imaging, decisions made in split seconds. The clot was located. They had a small window to remove it before irreversible damage set in. There was no time to dwell on anything but the work. The operating room was sterile white, silent except for the quiet beeping of monitors and the steady hum of voices beneath masks. The surgical lights cast harsh halos over the table, illuminating the fragility of the human body laid bare beneath a scalpel. Andre's hands were steady, practiced, guiding the catheter up through the femoral artery, threading toward the brain. Every movement was deliberate, every second calculated. There was no room for error. There was no room for who she was, or what she thought of him. There was only this. When the clot was successfully extracted, when the blood flow was restored, and the final suture was placed, he stepped back and exhaled. "Vitals stable," the anesthesiologist announced. She should regain consciousness in the next few hours. Andre stripped off his gloves and checked the clock. 5 hours. 5 hours of meticulous work. 5 hours spent ensuring that Margaret Sinclair, a woman who would have spat at the thought of a black man treating her, was alive. A nurse approached. "Dr. Bennett, you want to brief the family?" He shook his head. "Have neurology take the first pass. I'll check on her when she wakes up." And when she did, he already knew what was coming. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the quiet recovery room, a slow, rhythmic sound that signaled life where, hours before, death had been imminent. The dim overhead light cast soft shadows across the sterile walls, the air thick with the familiar scent of antiseptic and latex. Margaret Sinclair lay motionless against the stark white sheets, her breath shallow, her fingers twitching slightly beneath the covers. Then, a sharp inhale. A flicker of movement. Her eyelids fluttered before snapping open, her pupils darting around the room in confusion. For a moment she was disoriented. Then, her gaze settled on the tall figure at the foot of her bed. Dr. Andre Bennett stood there, his posture composed, his face unreadable. Clipboard in hand, he observed her with calm professionalism, his presence steady, unwavering. He had saved her life. And now, he was here to make sure she lived. Margaret's eyes widened as recognition dawned. The slow realization twisted her features from confusion to something darker, something raw, visceral. Disgust. Her lips parted, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps as she struggled to find her voice. Then, in a hoarse whisper, the words came. "Poisoned, laced with venom." "What the hell is this?" Her fingers gripped the blanket, twisting the fabric beneath her fists as if trying to ground herself in the reality of what she was seeing. "A damn Negro standing over me." The room shifted. The air, once clinical and detached, grew heavier, suffocating, crackling with an unspoken tension. Andre didn't flinch. He had been here before. "Good evening, Mrs. Sinclair," he said, his tone even, practiced. "I'm Dr. Bennett. I performed your surgery. I came to check on your condition." Margaret's body jolted as if struck, her breath hitching in her throat. The realization of what he had just said hit her like a slap across the face. Her fingers fumbled at the sheets, pushing them away, as if they were contaminated, as if she could erase the very fact of his touch from her skin. Her voice was sharper now, laced with raw horror. "You're lying." Andre didn't respond right away. He let the words settle, let the weight of them hang in the thick, charged air. Margaret shook her head, her mouth twisting into something ugly. "No, no, no, no. This isn't right. A real doctor must have been there. Someone else. Where's the surgeon?" Her frantic eyes scanned the room as if searching for salvation, for an escape from the impossible reality before her. Then, her gaze snapped back to him, sharper now, filled with something almost animalistic. "I want a real doctor. I want a white doctor." Andre inhaled slowly, steadying himself against the familiar sting of those words. Familiar, but never easier. "I assure you, Mrs. Sinclair," he said, his voice measured, "I was the lead surgeon on your case. Your condition was critical, and we acted quickly to ensure your survival. You're stable now, and..." Margaret let out a strangled, bitter laugh, if it could even be called that. Mocking. Cruel. You expect me to believe that? You? Her nostrils flared, her chest rising and falling with quick, agitated breaths. I don't want your kind touching me. Andre said nothing, his face unreadable, though inside he could feel the slow, creeping exhaustion that always accompanied moments like this. Margaret's voice dropped to a low hiss, thick with loathing. Who let this happen? She turned to the nurse standing by the monitor, her sharp, accusing eyes boring into the young woman. You people let this thing operate on me. The nurse Olivia visibly tensed, the muscles in her jaw tightening. Mrs. Sinclair, she began, her voice firm but polite. I understand that you've been through a lot, but please be respectful. Dr. Bennett is one of the best surgeons in this hospital. Margaret scoffed, her lip curling. A black man? The best. Don't make me laugh. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head, her fingers clutching at her hospital gown like she might claw her way out of it. I bet he did something to me. Probably cut corners, probably left something inside me just to watch me suffer. Oh God, her voice cracked, hysteria creeping into the edges. Did he put something in me? Andre's jaw clenched, but his voice remained steady. He wouldn't give her the reaction she wanted. Your surgery was performed according to standard procedure, and your recovery is progressing well, he stated. If you have concerns, I can have another doctor review your case, but I can assure you that. I don't need assurance from you, Margaret snapped. I need someone who actually knows what they're doing. Someone who wasn't just handed a degree because of some damn diversity quota. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Olivia's face was tight, anger flashing behind her eyes, but she held it in, shifting uncomfortably where she stood. Andre exhaled slowly, forcing himself to remain composed. He had long since learned how to swallow the fire that threatened to rise in his chest, how to smooth the sharp edges of his anger into something detached, something untouchable. Mrs. Sinclair, he said, tone still measured, if you'd like to speak with the hospital director, I can arrange that. But for now, I'm your assigned physician, and my priority is ensuring your recovery. Margaret's eyes burned into him. You're not touching me again, she hissed. I want you fired. I want you out of this hospital. I'll make sure of it. Andre inclined his head slightly, impassive. I'll inform the director of your request. He turned, stepping away from the bed, his fingers tightening around the clipboard just enough for the paper to bend under his grip. He had done his job. He had saved her life, and none of it mattered. As he walked toward the door, Margaret's voice followed him, sharp, venomous. You don't belong here. He paused just for a fraction of a second, then kept walking, letting the door click shut behind him. And in the silence that followed, he let out a slow, steady breath. This wasn't over. Dr. Rachel Whitmore's office was quiet, save for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant hum of hospital life beyond the door. The blinds were half drawn, slats casting streaks of dull afternoon light across the polished desk. The room was designed to exude controlled clean lines, muted colors, an air of authority. But right now, the space was filled with something ugly, something seething. Margaret Sinclair sat across from the desk, her knuckles white where they gripped the arms of her chair, her breathing sharp and clipped. Her normally composed, regal posture was taut with rage, her face flushed red, her narrowed eyes locked onto Dr. Whitmore with something between fury and indignation. Beside her, a stiff-backed man in an expensive suit, her lawyer, no doubt sat with a legal pad resting on his lap, scribbling down notes with methodical precision. Dr. Whitmore folded her hands atop the desk, her expression unreadable. She had dealt with difficult patients, high-profile donors, entitled executives, but Margaret Sinclair was something else entirely. The silence stretched, crackling with tension. Then a sharp, violent slap against the desk. Margaret's palm hit the polished wood with a force that sent a jolt through the room. I will not let this stand, she spat, her voice shaking with fury. You mean to tell me that this hospital, a hospital I have donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to, actually let a goddamn N-er cut me open? A damn monkey with a scalpel. Dr. Whitmore inhaled slowly, steadying herself, but before she could speak, Margaret lurched forward, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger. This is a disgrace, a travesty. A goddamn sick joke. I want every single thing that thing did to me examined by a real doctor. A white doctor. I don't trust a single stitch he put in me. He probably left something inside me, sewed me up wrong. Who knows what people like him are capable of. Dr. Whitmore's grip on her pen tightened, but her voice remained even. Controlled. Mrs. Sinclair, we've thoroughly reviewed Dr. Bennett's work, and there is no indication of negligence. Bullshit. Margaret barked, the words slicing through the air. Her lawyer shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie. He wasn't stopping her. Margaret leaned in, her eyes gleaming with something dangerous. I know exactly what this is. Her lip curled, her fingers tapping against the desk in a slow, deliberate rhythm. This hospital is bending over backwards for its little diversity quota, isn't it? Throwing affirmative action hires into positions they have no business being in. You people are so damned desperate to seem progressive that you'd rather put a white woman's life in the hands of some underqualified, incompetent street rat. Dr. Whitmore's jaw clenched slightly. Dr. Bennett is one of the most skilled surgeons in this hospital. His credentials are impeccable. Margaret let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Oh, I bet. Some woke medical board probably pushed him through. Probably didn't even have to work for it like the rest of us. And now I'm the one suffering because of it. Dr. Whitmore inhaled slowly through her nose. Mrs. Sinclair, I assure you. No, you listen to M.E. Margaret snapped, voice rising. I will not be dismissed. I will not be gaslit into thinking I'm the crazy one here. I want him gone. I want that filth out of this hospital. I want his license revoked. And if you don't make that happen, I'll take this public. I'll ruin you. I'll drag this entire hospital through the goddamn mud. You think you can silence me? I have connections. I know the right people. I'll have every news outlet in this city covering the story of how a black doctor experimented on an innocent white woman. A knock at the door. Then it opened. Dr. Andrew Bennett stepped inside, his presence filling the room instantly. His expression was unreadable, his posture calm, but the tension in his shoulders was there, beneath the surface, simmering. Margaret's entire body tensed the second she saw him. The color drained from her face, only to return a moment later in a deep, ugly flush. Oh, for God's sake. She jerked back in her chair as if his very presence was an offense. Why is H.E. here? I didn't agree to this. Dr. Whitmore gestured toward an empty chair. Dr. Bennett is here because this conversation concerns him. I think it's only fair that he... Fair? Fair? Margaret let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. I am the victim here, and you're telling me that she jabbed a finger toward Andre. Her voice trembling with rage, gets to sit here like some kind of equal. Like his word means as much as mine. Andre didn't blink. Mrs. Sinclair, I understand that you're upset, he said, voice steady. But I have done my job. I saved your life. Margaret's eyes burned into him, filled with something vile, something festering. You expect me to be grateful, she hissed. You expect me to thank you. If I had known what was happening, if I had been conscious, I would have rather died than let you touch me. A muscle in Andre's jaw tightened. He exhaled slowly. Margaret's lawyer cleared his throat. Dr. Bennett, he began, as I'm sure you're aware, my client is considering legal action against both you and this hospital. Given her distress and the circumstances surrounding her care, she feels that she has suffered both physically and emotionally. Andre met Margaret's gaze dead on. Emotionally, he repeated, voice quiet but firm. Tell me, Mrs. Sinclair, what exactly about being treated by a black doctor caused you so much distress? Margaret's lips parted slightly, a flicker of something almost like hesitation in her eyes just for a second, just long enough for him to notice. Then, just as quickly, the anger returned, hotter, sharper. You people always think you can get away with this, she hissed. You think you can come into our spaces, take our jobs, pretend to be as good as us. Andre leaned forward just slightly, just enough for his presence to feel heavier. I didn't pretend, he said, his voice a blade, calm, cool, cutting. I saved your life. I did what I was trained to do, what I worked my entire career to do. Margaret's nostrils flared. I don't care, she spat. I don't care what degrees they let you have. I don't care how many tests you passed. You are not equal to the doctors who actually earned their place here. You do not deserve to be here. And when I'm done, you won't be." Andre held her gaze unflinching. The words didn't hurt, not anymore. But the exhaustion, the sheer familiarity of them, that was what sank deep, settled into his bones. Dr. Whitmore exhaled, rubbing her temple. "Mrs. Sinclair," she said, voice tight, "if you choose to file a lawsuit, the hospital will respond accordingly. But for now, I will be assigning another physician to oversee your care." Margaret's face twisted into something triumphant. "Good." Andre stood. His work here was done. But as he turned toward the door, Margaret's voice followed, sharp as a knife. "You don't belong here. And I'll make sure everyone knows it." Andre didn't stop walking. Because he knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. She wasn't done. And neither was he. The courtroom was colder than it should have been, the air thick with the weight of everything unsaid. Overhead lights buzzed softly, casting a sterile glow over the polished wood of the judge's bench. The room smelled faintly of paper, ink, and old varnish. A battlefield disguised as civility. Andre sat at the defense table, his posture straight, his face unreadable. His suit was crisp, his tie perfectly knotted, but beneath the careful professionalism was a familiar exhaustion, the kind that settled deep into his bones, the kind that could never be shaken completely. Across the room, Margaret Sinclair sat beside her lawyer, her spine stiff, her expression carefully sculpted into something between wounded and righteously indignant. A woman scorned. A victim, as she had so carefully constructed herself to be. The plaintiff's attorney, a man in his mid-50s with slicked-back gray hair and a voice as polished as his Italian shoes, adjusted his cuffs before stepping toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone smooth, deliberate. "What happened to my client, Miss Sinclair, is an egregious miscarriage of justice. A white woman, entered St. Augustine Medical Center in need of critical care. She placed her life in the hands of medical professionals, expecting the standard of excellence that any patient deserves." He paused, letting the words settle, letting them sink into the room like slow poison. "But instead of receiving that care without bias," he continued, his voice lowering, "she was subjected to discrimination, retaliation, abuse. Not because of any fault of her own, but because of who she is." Andre didn't blink, didn't react. He had expected this approach. The lawyer turned, leveling a look in his direction. Dr. Bennett, a man in a position of power, saw an opportunity to punish my client for nothing more than the color of her skin. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Andre stayed still, silent, letting it wash over him. Margaret leaned forward slightly, her expression twisting, her voice breaking at the perfect moment. "He wanted me to suffer," she said, her eyes shining with carefully measured distress. "I could feel it. The way he looked at me, the way he treated me. I knew from the moment I woke up and saw him standing over me that something wasn't right. I begged for another doctor. I pleaded, but they ignored me." She turned to the jury now, letting the silence that followed do half the work. "I was at my weakest," she whispered, and he saw that as his chance. Andre finally let out a slow breath, his fingers threading together atop the defense table. He felt the eyes on him. The weight of every assumption, every carefully placed word meant to warp the truth into something damning. The lawyer pressed on. "Mrs. Sinclair has suffered both physically and emotionally. She has endured pain, distress, and an overwhelming fear that she was operated on by someone who did not have her best interests at heart. This is not just malpractice. This is personal. This is racial bias in its most insidious form." Andre's attorney, a composed black woman named Vanessa Carter, finally stood. She moved with quiet authority, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she approached the jury. "Let's talk about facts," she said, her voice cutting through the charged air. "Not speculation, not feelings, not personal grievances disguised as something more, just facts." She gestured toward Andre. "Dr. Bennett is an experienced, highly trained surgeon with an impeccable record. He has performed hundreds of these procedures with a success rate that speaks for itself. His qualifications are unquestionable." She turned, walking slowly toward the jury box. "Mrs. Sinclair claims she was targeted because of her race, that she was harmed, mistreated, made to suffer. Vanessa paused, then reached for the stack of medical records sitting on the evidence table. "Let's examine the truth, shall we?" She held up the chart, flipping to a specific page. According to these records signed off by multiple specialists, Miss Sinclair's surgery was performed perfectly. There were no complications, no errors, no evidence of malpractice. She let that settle, then stepped closer to the jury. "Now, I want you to consider something very important. This lawsuit isn't about negligence. It's about something much simpler. Miss Sinclair did not want Dr. Bennett to operate on her because of the color of his skin. She made that clear the moment she woke up. She demanded a white doctor. She accused Dr. Bennett of incompetence before she even heard the details of her surgery. And now, because her words alone weren't enough to get him removed from his position, she's trying to destroy his career through the courts." Margaret's face twisted, her nails digging into the fabric of her dress. Vanessa turned to face the plaintiff's table. "This lawsuit isn't about justice. It's about revenge." Margaret bolted upright. "Lies," she shrieked, the careful veneer cracking all at once. She wanted to hurt me. He did this on purpose. They all do. They hate US. They want to take everything from US. A loud bang echoed through the room as the judge slammed his gavel down. "Order," he barked, eyes narrowing at Margaret, who was panting, trembling, her face red with fury. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Margaret's lawyer looked mortified. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to say anything. The damage was done. Andre sat still, watching Margaret as the weight of her outburst settled into the air around them. The jury had seen her now, not the fragile victim she had pretended to be, but the truth of her, raw and exposed. The judge exhaled sharply. "I think we've heard enough." 30 minutes later, after deliberation, everyone stood as the judge re-entered, his expression firm, his voice steady as he read the verdict aloud. "This court finds that there is no evidence of malpractice or racial bias in the treatment of Mrs. Sinclair. The case is hereby dismissed." A slow, sharp exhale left Andre's chest. Margaret went rigid, frozen in her seat. Her lawyer ran a hand down his face. She turned toward the judge, eyes wide, furious, desperate. No, this isn't right. He's getting away with it." The judge's expression didn't waver. "Mrs. Sinclair, the decision is final. This case is over." Margaret's breath came in short, furious gasps, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. For a moment, it looked like she might scream. Instead, she turned toward Andre, her voice barely above a whisper, thick with venom. "This isn't over." Andre met her gaze, calm, composed, steady. "Yes," he said simply, "it is." As he turned to leave, the weight of everything, the trial, the accusations, the endless, exhausting battle finally began to lift. It wasn't over forever. People like Margaret Sinclair would always exist, but today the truth had won. And that, for now, was enough. The hospital break room was quiet, the scent of stale coffee lingering in the air. Dr. Andre Bennett sat at the table, fingers wrapped around a cup he had no intention of drinking. The trial was over. He had won. And yet, the weight in his chest remained. Dr. Rachel Whitmore sat across from him, studying his face. "I know this isn't the first time, and it won't be the last," she said gently. Andre exhaled, shaking his head. "I did everything right, and still I had to fight to prove I belong here. Will it ever stop?" She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You do belong here, and no one like Margaret Sinclair will ever change that." Outside these walls, Margaret was already facing the consequences. The public had turned against her. Her name, once powerful, was now met with whispers and condemnation. She had tried to ruin him. Instead, she had ruined herself. Andre stood, tossing his coffee. The night air hit his skin as he stepped outside, looking up at the sky. The fight wasn't over, but he was still standing. And whatever came next, he was ready.